So by now you may be asking yourself this particular question, which is, who the hell is this guy and why have I come to this room? So maybe I should tell you a little bit about myself. Briefly, I'm Jonathan White. I'm a surgeon. I work at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. I actually do general and colorectal surgery. As you might tell, I didn't grow up in Edmonton. I'm actually from Belfast in Northern Ireland. I did all my training in surgery back home there, and then I came to Calgary actually 2004, and then moved to Edmonton 2006. And the last 5 years I've been involved mostly in surgical education, teaching people how to do surgery, and also teaching medical students about surgery. And just in the last few months, I've actually been appointed as the University of Alberta's first endowed chair in surgical education. So I have a bit more time to kind of sit back now and think about some of the bigger ticket items in terms of how we strategize and how we plan. And how we go forward in surgical education. I guess the other thing is that, a bit like Jonathan Colton, I am a bit of a techno-geeky nerd. I'm the first guy that I know who had an email address or a website or a blog page. And also, I mean, I'm not sure why, but as you'll see, I'm quite interested, and always have been quite interested, in science fiction, in novels and in movies that talk about the future and talk about what's coming down the pipe. And I'll be illustrating some of the things I'm saying with examples from science fiction and from literature to talk about where we might be going next. As I say, it's handy there's not many people around, because I may say things that may not make very much sense, at least at this point in the cycle. And it's useful, I think, for me to come here and try to get some of the thoughts that I'm having into an organized way. So I think it's great that Kim has organized this course, because it lets people like me have an outlet to say, well, here's some of the stuff I'm thinking about where we're going to be in 2045. And it's just me trying to put this jigsaw puzzle together. So I'm hoping I get more out of this talk than you do. And as I say, we are thinking out of the box. It is a bit unusual. It is a bit strange. And I ask you to suspend your disbelief for a minute. A lot of people in the room are going to go, hang on a minute, you can't do that, or how would that possibly happen? And I don't have any answers to those questions. I would say, as I said before, it's kind of a wide-ranging talk. At one point I'm going to be talking about the Big Bang, and towards the end I'll be talking about the heat death of the universe, and kind of everything in between. And we'll talk a bit about life and a bit about death. We may talk a little bit about God at some point towards the end as well. So I'll probably take most of the hour. To start off, actually, if you look at the sign-in sheet outside, whenever I came to the first week of this course, it's in a bit of a rush, and there's a section on the form where it says reason for attending, and I just wrote down one word, which was Kurzweil, because I've read Ray Kurzweil's work. So I wanted to kind of spend a minute starting off talking about Kurzweil and the singularity and what my understanding of it is, because I think everybody has a slightly different understanding. So here he is himself, a little bit younger than he is now, and here are the two Kurzweil books that I've read. So I think Spiritual Machines came out first, and I actually encountered the Singularity is Near as the first book. I think it was while I was still in Calgary, so it must have been maybe Christmas 2005. So basically he's talking about the singularity being near in that book, and he talks about genomics and nanotech and robotics as possibly enabling the singularity. And the subtitle you can see, or perhaps the third title, because it's at the top, is When Humans Transcend Biology. And this is a big book. I got it in hardback, and it's like that thick. And I read through it in maybe 3 nights, because I thought it was fantastic. It wasn't like any book that I'd read before. And then I kind of went back and read how he was thinking before that about the age of spiritual machines. And it's not to say that Kurzweil is the only person who's doing this. There are some other people. Here's a book by a guy called Nam called More Than Human, Embracing the Promise of Biological Enhancement. And then there's Garreau's Radical Evolution, talking about the promise and peril of enhancing our minds and our bodies and kind of reconsidering what it means to be human. So Kurzweil's one of the thinkers, but there's a number of others as well. And we've gone back and forth in this course. I haven't been able to attend many of the sessions, but I have been following on Facebook, and we've had a number of kind of definitions floating around of what the singularity is. And I think that's kind of my basic understanding of what the singularity is, which is there's a moment coming when something is going to happen with technology, when it's changing so rapidly that it represents a rupture in the fabric of human history. And the idea is that's going to happen around about 2045. And if you look at where that term comes from, singularity is really talking about in physics anyway, in a black hole. You go beyond the event horizon, you get sucked into the black hole, and at the bottom of the black hole, you're sucked through and pushed through the singularity, and nothing that goes through the singularity can come back. You've gone through the singularity, you're essentially in a different universe. You've gone to another state of existence. So it is a bit funny talking about, you know, what's going to happen after the singularity, because after the singularity, things are different, and they're different in a way that we can't understand where we are at the moment. So it's a curious idea thinking about what's down the bottom of that hole, because going through the hole, you can't come back again. And Kurzweil is a little bit frustrating, because he says we're at A now, and we're going to B. And he doesn't tell us really much about what's in between. Like, how do you get from A to B? He talks about our current state. He talks about what's going to happen down the future, but he doesn't really map it out for us in much detail. And I suppose that's fair enough, because the man can't make so many predictions. He's never going to get it completely right. I actually think that it's interesting to figure out what the sequence is going to be, but we're almost certainly not going to do it the way Kurzweil says. We're almost certainly not going to do it the way that I think or that you think. It'll be something else, something different completely. I'm going to focus on what B might be like in terms of embodiment and bodies, and then maybe we'll come back at the end and talk about what's actually in this big yellow arrow that gets us to state B. And I want to look at that surtitle a bit more at the top of Kurzweil's book, because he said, when humans transcend biology, what might that actually mean? So if you take it apart and break it up into two parts, to transcend, this is from dictionary.com. So it's got three meanings. It's a verb, obviously, used with an object, and we're transcending biology, so biology is the object. So in terms of transcending, we're talking about, meaning number one is rising above or going beyond, overpassing, exceeding, transcending the limits of thought. Number two is outdoing, some kind of excellence or elevation or going beyond in some form of degree. And number three brings in the numinous, which is to say that it's a theological transcension, to be above and independent of universe and time. And I'll maybe talk about that, the meaning of transcend, towards the end as well. And the other side of the conjunction is biology. So here's everybody's favorite reference source, Wikipedia, about what biology is. So, and it may seem silly to do this. It may seem silly to say, well, what's biology? But it's about life and organisms, about structure, function, growth, origin, evolution. And there are 5 basic principles: that cells are important, that traits arise through evolution, that genes are important in terms of heredity, that there's some regulation within the organism, and that there's some consumption or transformation of energy. So I want to dig into that a bit more deeply and talk a bit about biology. Because we're going to talk about what we're supposed to be transcending. And when we get to point B, we have to understand where we are at point A. So I'd like to go back to the previous singularity in this universe, which is the Big Bang, which happened a long, long time ago. So there's a big explosion in the universe, and lots of matter is ejected from it. And at some point in this local vicinity of the space-time continuum, some of the matter that's ejected forms into a star, and there's some matter that orbits around that, and we end up with a solar system. And we happen to be on this blue one, the third from the left, obviously. And there's lots of other planets. I mean, this isn't to scale, obviously. There's lots of other planets in the solar system. And at some point, life arises. At some point, something happens on that planet. And this is our conception of how we get to be where we are today. Essentially, we start off as apes, and we get... We start to walk on 2 legs. We start to use tools. Our bodies start to change, Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals, and at some point we get to where we are, modern man. It's important to remember where we came from, because essentially we are hairless apes who walk erect and make noises with their anatomy. I mean, I'm breathing the local atmosphere here and expelling it to you in a certain way to communicate with you. We're symbol-using animals, essentially, and I'm using symbols, pictures, and words to communicate with you. So that's my understanding of where we are in terms of biology. In terms of the body then, I mean, bodies are difficult sometimes. And to a certain extent, I mean, I'm talking about something that everybody is totally familiar with. I can talk about the type of car that I have, or the type of computer that I have, or the type of furnace that I have in my house, and I don't know if you have the type of car or furnace or computer, but I sure as hell know you have a body. Everybody in this room has a body, so we're aware of that. And they are sensitive topics. This is an exhibition obviously called Bodies, the exhibition, where they looked at anatomy and they've taken the skin off people who donated their corpses, and it's partly scientific and it's partly artistic. And there are some people who think this is terrible, doing this to a body, and this being a person who's actually on display for some sort of entertainment. So I talk about bodies with as someone who's very familiar with bodies and their failings. I talk about this with some trepidation because it is a sensitive subject. Because when you're talking about my body, you're talking about me. It's a very personal thing. Here's our standard diagram, the internal organs of the human body. There we go. There's the brain at the top, and the lungs, and the heart, and all the rest. I spend most of my working life below the diaphragm. So I work on the liver, and the gallbladder, and the stomach, and the colon, and the small intestine. In fact, the part that I spend most time on, which is the colon, rectum, and anus, isn't actually on that. It's right down at the bottom. So I do most of my work in colorectal surgery. And if you think about, obviously this is an evolved system. It's got this way through millions of years of evolution. Really, over the last maybe 40 or 50 years, we've started to look at the body a bit more critically and say, well, which parts of it break down and which parts of it can we replace or can we support? And really, pretty much all of the body is replaceable or supportable or actually ejectable or get rid offable, except the brain. The warranty for your body is really void if your brain is gone. We would talk about brain death. If somebody comes in, they have a bad trauma, and their brain is dead, even though their heart is still beating and their lungs are still going and so forth, they're really dead at that point. And you can live with a heart transplant. You can have a lung transplant, somebody else's lungs. You actually live without most of your colon and your bile and all that sort of stuff. But the brain is something different. The brain is something that's something not like the other organs. And it is this kind of magical thing when we think about the brain. Essentially, when I think about the brain, it's my brain thinking about itself. And is it me? Is it me that's thinking about it? Or where does consciousness sit? It's clearly something to do with the brain. But where is it? If you look back in philosophy, you've got Descartes, of course, who was the first guy to really think about the dualism of mind and body, the fact that mind is one thing and body is a slightly different thing. And there are those two separate concepts in the embodied life. I like this cartoon. It's actually by a friend of mine who's a cartoonist in California. This is the surgeon. He's speaking to Mr. White, and the surgeon explains they have to do a headectomy. And Mr. White is very distressed because he loves his head. And the surgeon says, well, I have another option, which is a bodyectomy. We can take your whole body off and keep your head. And because that's where consciousness exists, or at least we think that. And of course, you go back in history, people used to say, well, consciousness is life is in the heart. You can't live without your heart, right? But Christian Barnard disproved all that when he did the first heart transplant. So I'd like to go on and talk a bit more about bodies, but I have to make a statement first, which is to say, I may say some nasty things about bodies in a minute, but I really love my body, and I couldn't live without it. Really, I'd like it to be stronger or slimmer or faster or more intelligent in some ways. But really, at the end of the day, if it's a choice between body and no body, I'm going to hang on to my body. I know it quite well. I've known it for more than 40 years now. I don't think anybody would love it as much as I would. So really, I want to hang on to it. Because it makes me an individual. I don't think there's anybody else just quite like me on this planet. And I speak as somebody who has a twin brother, actually. I know he's not really like me at all. So there's something about having a body which makes you distinct. So Kim is distinct from Bibiana, is distinct from everybody else in this room because of your body. Maybe because of the way your body works. And we're all familiar with the good things about having a body. So sex is a wonderful thing about having a body. Because, of course, we're programmed to reproduce, to keep the species going, and I think that's why we enjoy sex. We also enjoy food. So you go out to dinner tonight, you have a great steak, you go to the restaurant. Food is fantastic. It's wonderful being embodied. You get to eat lovely food. And again, it's a kind of a neurochemical thing. You eat the food, your brain feels better, chemicals are secreted, and pleasure occurs. Also, being embodied means you're in the physical world. So you get to climb up mountains, you get to go to lakes, you get to run around the Rockies and have a great time being embodied in the world. And if you think about those things, if you suddenly feel like you're not the same as everybody else, if you feel like you're suddenly the same as everybody else and you're not an individual, like you're just a clone and everybody's the same, then that takes some measure of joy away in your life. If you're not able to relate to another person sexually, that takes some of the joy of being alive away. If you can't, I have a lot of patients who have trouble with eating or can't eat, and that takes some of the life away. And if you're stuck and disabled and cannot move around the world the way that other people can, then maybe your body has kind of let you down a little bit. I want to talk a minute about kind of the body and information, to say what are the informational limits of the body. I'm going to develop this more in a minute. So here's our brain again, and it's got lots of sensory inputs from all around the body, and eyes and ears and taste and touch and so forth. But really remember where this amazing organ came from, because it evolved. We're the apes on the third planet circling the yellow sun in the western spiral arm of this galaxy. And it came from processes like this, going on for tens of thousands of years. We're evolved to kind of hunt and kill and live on the veldt and survive like that. And we haven't really had an opportunity to have technology get involved in evolution at all. Really, technology hasn't been around long enough to do that. So our brain is still, in large part, evolved for situations like this. And it's not really designed to do what this guy is doing. It's not designed to flip through data on a laptop. It's not designed to handle binary information. It's very much, I hear stuff and my brain processes it. I see stuff and my brain processes it. It's not really equipped to do high-speed processing. And I don't know about anybody else here, but I've started to notice over the last little while that I'm starting to get overwhelmed. Like, I'm fairly good with email. I maybe have 5 or 10 things left in my inbox to deal with tonight. And I've got to deal with them because there's going to be more coming tomorrow. But I'm starting to notice that the pile of books on my bedside table is getting higher and higher because I just can't get through them. I can't read fast enough. And I have an iPad. I have books on the iPad and everything. I can read it on my phone anywhere you go. But even with that, I just can't keep up. I play video games. I'm on the PlayStation, and I've got a stack of games that I haven't got around to yet. And so I haven't played Dead Space 2 yet. I haven't even finished Red Dead Redemption. And I'm really afraid my wife's going to buy me Call of Duty or Battlefield 3 because when am I going to find time for this? I feel like my brain is kind of just letting me down a bit. Like, maybe I should clone myself. In fact, my secretary, often to my assistant Tracy, says, really, you should clone yourself. We need maybe 2 of you, or possibly 3, just to keep up with all the stuff that you want to do. And if you want to see an application of this problem in everyday life, look at distracted driving. Here's somebody who thinks they can do everything. They think their brain is capable of the whole thing. He can drink his coffee and check his text on what looks like a very elderly trio, actually, and speak to somebody at the same time while driving. And it's very clear that that's not the case. I was at a talk at a conference last week on multitasking, and it was a cognitive psychologist said multitasking is a complete misnomer because the brain is capable of one thing at a time. If you think someone is multitasking, they're actually doing rapid task switching. They're doing one task and then stopping that one, switching to another one briefly, then switching back again. Brain is only capable of one thing at any one moment. And when someone is trying to do multiple things like this, the brain gets overwhelmed and the guy crashes his car. It's a bit like, if you remember, certainly this is kind of the early 80s, one of the first Apples. And it's got a little floppy disk, and it's got maybe 512 megabytes of RAM, and that's it. I remember in the UK we had the equivalent was the BBC Model B, and you had a 512K RAM that you had to use audio tape to play programs into the memory of the thing. I mean, and when you tried to do more than one thing, even when you tried to do one thing, the computer couldn't cope. I think we're kind of getting to that point with the brain now. Like, we're saying, we want to do this, 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 and this. And the brain is going, no, I'm designed to hunt woolly mammoths, thanks. And that's all I can do at the moment. I can do one thing at a time. I can't do 14 things. To go to another branch of philosophy, this is a quote from Joan Didion, a book in the 60s called The White Album. And she talks about how we experience our own lives. She talks about how we tell ourselves stories. We look for sense in things that happen to us. We select the things that make sense, that are the most workable of the multiple choices that come up. We basically take this, what she calls a shifting phantasmagoria, this amazing constant stream of consciousness that goes all day long, 24 hours a day, and we realize it's too much for us and we can't cope with it. So we chop it up into small, discrete fragments. We talk about ideas and make stories from the ideas, just the way I'm doing in this talk. because I'm using pictures and I'm using words and I'm speaking and I'm kind of chopping it up so that I can understand and maybe you can understand as well. Because we can't take the whole of existence, we can't take the moment-to-moment stuff, it's too much for us. It's too much for our brains. To develop this idea a bit more, I want to talk about some of the downsides of bodies a little bit more, because I've talked about the informational downside. The flesh is actually weak. I mean, it's an old saying, but it's actually true. It's great to be in a body and eat and enjoy food. But if you don't have enough food, that's a big issue. And lots of people in the world today don't have enough food and die of starvation, which is an issue. If it's fine if you're in the westernized, global democracy countries where we have a surfeit of food and a surfeit of energy. It's not so good if you're one of these guys in southern Sudan who doesn't make it until tomorrow morning. It's fine if you're an individual. It's fine being an individual and separate from other people. But being an individual implies separation. Like, I am different from you, you are different from me. And that means that there's a certain competition for resources. Like, I want that bottle of Coke and you can't have it. Or I want that land and you can't have it. Or I want that woman and you can't have it. And it leads to things like conflict between individuals. It leads to things like war, because we're stuck in these individual bodies that aren't really shared and we don't really have a shared experience. I mean, I'm conscious it's 8:05 on a Wednesday night, and we get tired. I mean, as much as you might like to sit up tonight and read about stuff or watch the latest episode of Sons of Anarchy, at some point you're going to get tired. You're going to wink out and you're going to have to go to bed. And that's going to happen pretty much every single day of your life. Most of the sleep studies suggest you can go for about 3 or 4 days without sleep before you start hallucinating and becoming and rambling the way I'm doing at the moment. Of course, it's an old saying from Northern Ireland, actually, that we are bound by the bowels and tethered by the toilet. As much as you might like to do whatever you want with your life, at some point you're going to have to pee, you're going to have to poop. There's no way around that. If you want to go to interesting things around the world and meet interesting people, you're actually going to have to physically go there. You're going to have to get in the plane and travel across the world and sit with people in the same room, because our technology is not really up to the point yet where we can have meaningful mass collaboration with this number of people without actually physically being in the same room. Of course, the thing about being a body is we think we're in control of our bodies. We think our bodies belong to us, or we think we're in charge of them in some way. And of course, we're not. I mean, here's a guy with a 51-inch waistline, and I guess he would like to be lighter, he would like to be slimmer, he would like to be thinner, he'd like to be healthier, but his body just won't do what he wants it to. And if anybody's ever had diarrhea, if anybody's ever got the flu unexpectedly, or ever started throwing up, or had gastroenteritis, you're at the will of the body, essentially. There's a sociologist I know called Art Frank, who works in the University of Calgary, and Art's actually written a book called, it's a book about his own illness called At the Will of the Body. And basically he says, if you think you're in charge of your body, you are completely wrong, because your body's in charge of you. You think you're the boss, and you're not. So the body's kind of unruly in that way. But bear in mind that we're also fragile. We're also fragile human beings. We have to be handled carefully. We are fragile. We don't respond well to changes in environmental conditions. We don't do well with temperature. We don't do well with radiation. We don't do well with being submerged for long periods underwater. Also, our bodies tend to let us down in kind of unpredictable ways. So here's a lady with a very nasty breast cancer. And I think it's a very reasonable question for her to ask, to say, what gives here? I mean, I'm doing all the right things. I'm, living a healthy life, and my body has in some way turned against me. Some part of my breast has developed a tumor and it's spread under my arm now. And now I'm going to have to die because my body has kind of let me down. And I talk to medical students about this quite a bit. This is the first year medical school class, all dressed up as surgeons in the Introduction to Surgery talk. And one of the students came up to me afterwards and said, you're talking about suffering and people who have disease and surgery and pain and so forth. There is nobility in suffering, right? There's growth and character formation, and people who suffer are noble in some way. I said, well, I mean, that's nice. It's nice that you would think that. But if you have a choice between suffering and no suffering, nobody's going to pick the suffering. Nobody's going to say, oh, I want to be noble. I want to grow through suffering. I want to be in pain. People avoid things that are horrible for them, and that's very reasonable indeed. And I think in some way we've got so used to being in bodies that we've kind of forgotten the alternative to this. So, you know, I think the idea that there's nobility in suffering is just a reaction to the fact that we can't fix suffering. We can't make it go away. We can't avoid it, so we have to somehow rationalize it. And we say, well, it's noble to be in pain. Other thing is, of course, that bodies don't last forever, and I mean, I'm in my middle 40s now, and I'm already starting to see that my body's just not as reliable as it was when I was in my 20s and 30s. This is my grandmother, Elizabeth Brown. So she was born in Belfast in 1917. She's actually the only person in my family who can claim to be Irish, because she was born in the Republic of, well, she was born in Ireland before it was partitioned, before it became the North and South. And she's been dead for about 5 years. And this is one of my last visits back home, because I'd moved to Canada at this point. And I remember having a conversation with her, and she said, inside, I feel like I'm still that 18-year-old girl who went to the linen factory and married Jimmy Brown and all the different things that happened in her life. Inside, I feel like I'm still that person. But she said, look at my hands, they're covered in arthritis, I can hardly button up my clothes. She actually said, you know, I'm in a rubbish body. I mean, rubbish meaning trash, rubbish meaning this terrible thing. She kind of said, I'm trapped in this. And she lived until she was 85 or 86, so she had a fairly good life. But she said, I'm trapped in this body that's let me down. I've got to the end of my life now, and I can't do anything. And if you look at photographs of her through her whole life, her body changed radically during her life. She used to be a very large woman, and she was very, very thin by the time she died. And I remember when I left, she had a diagnosis of lung cancer, and she was going for treatment and so forth. And I had come home to visit her. And I remember the last conversation I had with her, and I said, I'll see you again. And she knew that it was a lie, and I knew that it was a lie. But we lied to each other, and she died a couple of weeks later. So our bodies die, which is a problem for me. I mean, it's nice that we have accepted that, and it's nice that death is part of the cycle of life, right? Life and death. But still, I think death is a bit of a tragedy, because all of the stories and things that she had, all of the things she didn't have time to tell us, or things that she had forgotten, got lost when she died. And we can't go back again. This is, we talked about Blade Runner a bit in the course. This is Roy Batty, who's one of the replicants in Blade Runner. And it's a very famous scene from the end of the movie, where basically Harrison Ford, or Deckard, has been chasing Roy Batty, and it's clear that Roy Batty is better than him and stronger than him and is going to kill him. And at some point, Roy Batty turns around and says, well, I can feel myself dying. I can feel my body wearing out now. And he says, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time like tears in rain. And then he says, time to die, and he switches off. And Harrison Ford is completely confused. This guy who was about to kill him a minute ago has just been switched off. And everything that he has seen, all these wonderful things that he's seen off planet in the solar system, are lost like tears in rain. And to bring it back to the mortal coil, this is the kind of conversation that I have maybe every 2 or 3 months with a relative of somebody who's come in to have surgery and it hasn't gone well and they've died. And I have to sit down beside them and say, I'm really sorry, but your husband who left the house this morning got hit by the LRT train, and we did everything we could for him, and he's dead now. And there's no way back past that. In the morning he was fine, and you kind of wondered what should you say to him? Should you tell him whether you love him or not? Or how should you greet your loved ones when they're coming and going? And this woman's clearly about to have her life turned upside down, because it's gone like that. And that could happen to any of us at any moment. It could be a giant meteor comes through that ceiling right now. It takes out the U of A hospital. We're all toast, and there's no going back. Or you get killed by the LRT, or run over by a bus, or you just happen to have a heart attack on the way home, and you're gone. So I think we're kind of putting all of our very interesting eggs in a very fragile biological basket. So let me talk a bit about surgery and tell you why kind of I'm interested in the body. This is my definition I use with medical students in the first year talk. The surgery is about using hands to operate on the body to combat, alleviate, prevent distress, suffering, and death. And the idea behind this is that basically we're all biological. Disease is actually a function, or I suppose a weakness maybe, of biology, and that if you're biological, you're prone to breakdown. And all the things we teach students about infection, inflammation, degeneration, neoplasia, all the rest. And we have to treat these biological systems because they fail. It's about treating the failings of them. So when I characterize myself to the students, I say, well, I'm the biological repairman. All that I do is on this slide. I rewire things, I replumb things, I take out broken parts, put new ones in, I cut bad pieces out, I fix things that are blocked, I release evil humours and fluids and things, I fix things that are leaking, and occasionally I'll upgrade the basic models. I'm like Mr. Fix-It. And those are the examples. So, a cardiac surgeon might rewire the heart, rewire the blood supply to the heart. An orthopedic surgeon would give you a new hip, replacing the old one. I do a lot of cancer surgery, cutting out the bad pieces, and I operate on people with obstructions and deal with blockages and that sort of thing. And you can see the other ones there. So basically, I think that's why I claim to be a biological repairman, because I have to repair biology because it breaks down. And this is just to give you a few kind of shots of surgery. This is a fairly classical approach for, I think it's a laparoscopic appendectomy. So that's the belly button in the middle where the white thing is, and the legs are facing that way, and the head is up here. We're putting these little incisions in and long instruments through to take the appendix out. Here's another option for that operation is actually an open appendectomy. So here's somebody who's got a painful abdomen, and we're having to make a cut in her abdominal wall and pull the appendix out so we can take it out, stop it bursting and stop her getting sick. I also do quite a lot of trauma surgery over at the Royal Alexandra, because we're north of the river. We're the grungy downtown urban trauma centre, and I get a lot of people who've been stabbed, I get a lot of people who've been shot, and I get a lot of people who are in motor vehicle accidents. So I spend a lot of time being aware of how biology breaks down, not just how it goes wrong in terms of blockages and cancer and stuff, but how fragile and how weak it is and how easily it can be injured. When the person who was in this car got into the car to go to work that morning, they didn't think they would end up in something that looks like this. And the car's kind of crumpled, and I suspect the person inside is crumpled as well. So I think, at least from my point of view, I think the surgeon is a bit like Bob the Builder, because we repair things. The trouble with surgery, of course, is that there's a bit of a disconnect. Most disease that we treat with surgery occurs at a fairly low level of molecules, and of genomics and proteomic level. And if you look at things like cancer and heart disease, that's where it starts. But as surgeons, we treat things at a very macro scale. Like, I've got a big, sharp piece of metal I'm going to cut you open with. When I do surgery, or we're going to give you toxic drugs that are going to treat your entire body, not just the part of the genome that's broken down. And we treat you with toxic things like radiation and chemotherapy as well. So the disease is happening at a low level, and we're treating it at a very high level. And I've got another friend who's a cartoonist in the States called Adam Coford, and he's actually got this, for $10, he will draw you a picture of your profession with one proviso, that it has to be a monkey. So if you're a policeman, he'll draw a monkey as a policeman, or a policeman as a monkey. Or if you're a minister, he'll draw a minister as a monkey. So I said, Adam, I'm a surgeon. Can you draw me a picture of my profession? Sent him my $10, and he sent me this picture back called Monkey Surgeon. And I think it's actually quite accurate, because, I think from a biological evolutionary perspective, I'm a very highly trained monkey operating on another monkey with a very sharp set of bananas. And that's the level that we're at the moment. I think that this is an old-fashioned TV screen. It's a bit like when you used to have a problem with the TV, my father would go up to it and kind of slap it on the side, as if hitting the TV, hitting the cabinet of the TV would make it better in some way, would fix the problem. He didn't know what the matter with it was, but he thought if he hit it, it would make it better, and often it worked. And I think that's exactly where we are with our understanding of how the body works. We kind of hit it with big things like knives and chemotherapy and radiation, because we don't understand what's really going on underneath the skin. So I think, for the future, looking at the future of surgery, I think surgery is going to be here for a while still, because we kind of need it as long as we are biological. Or at least we need it at least until we can figure out how everything works. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So in summary then, the good side of biology is it's free. Like, you get a free body when you're born. You don't need to apply for one. It's familiar, like it's really familiar, like it's all we've ever known. It's self-replicating, like we make more of them. Not quite automatically, but nearly automatically. And it does repair itself. I mean, I consider myself as a surgeon almost after the operation to be a recovery maintenance supervisor. Like, I don't make the wounds heal. The wounds heal by the patient's bodies do that for themselves, so they do repair themselves. It's got a pretty long battery life. I mean, if you buy an iPhone, it's not going to be around in 85 years, but your body's going to hopefully be around as long as that, if you're lucky. It kind of looks after itself. You don't need to be worried about what your blood pressure is at this moment or what your pulse is at this moment, because it regulates itself. As I say, it is familiar to us because it's what we evolved with. It's why we have opposable thumbs. It's how we can walk upright on 2 feet. And we're fairly familiar with living in our own brains. And, you know, the other good side of biology, it's kind of all we've got for now. There really isn't another alternative. I can't sign a contract to get out of my body and move to something else just at the moment. The downside is, as I said, it's kind of unreliable. It's kind of fragile. There's no backup. You can't, if you get hit by the bus tonight, you can't restore yourself after a crash. You can actually restore your iPhone, you can restore your hard drive at home, but you can't restore your brain and your personality. There is no warranty, and there's no one you can complain to when your device goes wrong. If my iPhone doesn't work, I send it back to Apple. But it's single use only. So that means if you die 15 minutes after you're born, that is tough. You don't get another go round. If you're the 15-year-old with leukemia who's resistant to all the chemotherapy, you are out of luck. You're not getting the same as the person who lives until 115. There's no creator to send it back to. Say it's got a limited shelf life. It's not going to be around forever. Some of the basic functions like eating and pooping and things like that are kind of a little bit messy. Making new units, as I've said, is kind of fun, but it's slow. Because it takes a full 9 months to make a new one of these. And as I said, the processor speed is a bit limited, and there's limited capacity for upgrades. So let me flip you back to the top of the slide and imagine you were buying a new cell phone, and they said, this is the features of your cell phone. It's fragile, it can't back up, there's no warranty with it, limited shelf life, it's messy, it's slow, and speed is limited. You might well not buy that cell phone based on some of the characteristics that are there. So if I'm kind of giving the body a hard time here, I say I speak as an owner and a user. I'm a member of the body user group. What are the alternatives? So I'd say maybe there are 2 general alternatives, 2 kind of theoretical alternatives. One is to kind of get to grips with biology where it lives, like take it into its house and figure out how things work at a molecular genomic level. Option number 2 is to give up on the body and say it's too complicated, it's too hard, and let's do something else, which is kind of where Kurzweil is going with the transcendence thing. And again, this is if you think the talk is a bit weird so far, this is even weirder, this part of the talk. We're again out of the box, and we're suspending disbelief. A lot of what Kurzweil writes about is really predicated on Moore's law, which is to say that technology will continue to advance, processors will get faster, technology will get cheaper. So for the purpose of this section of the talk, I'm going to suggest that technology will essentially do whatever we want it to do, as fast as we want it to do, and that the cost of that will be tending towards zero as quickly as you would like, to the point where the technology we're talking about will be as cheap as water and as freely available as air. And here we are talking about, just to remind you again, about what transcending means, about going beyond, about going past. And some of what I'm going to talk about is going to be far down the road, and some of it is already happening. I mean, as Brian Ferren said, technology is just stuff that doesn't work yet. As soon as you get technology right, you actually can't see it anymore. Like, nobody thinks about electricity as a technology anymore because it's just here. It's just all around us. Because we don't think, gosh, that wonderful electricity, isn't it amazing? Because we don't see it anymore. William Gibson said, the future is already here. You can see it, you can hold it in your hands. It's just not widely distributed yet. It just hasn't quite got there yet. I know just this image at the bottom right here, when we moved from the UK to Canada, I actually bought my father an eMac, which is the educational version that came before the iMac, specifically for the purpose of using a webcam. We had an eMac in Calgary, he had an eMac in Belfast. And we still, to this day, have a web chat about 4 o'clock Mountain Time on a Sunday. And I think, you know, over the years, we've realized that, I mean, my twin brother lives 10 minutes down the road and I live in Canada. And I speak to my father more on the webcam than he does, because we're using the technology to keep that link alive. And I think that's the way that kind of technology has changed the way that I live. I think sometimes we get a bit mixed up about what we're talking about when we talk about spiritual machines and we talk about transcendence. We talk about what the singularity is. And I think we get a bit worried about the fact that technology is going to take us over somehow. There'll be something, some Terminator or something like Skynet in the Terminator movies that's somehow going to rule the world and crush us all, or there's going to be a grey goo problem with nanotech that's going to just munch the world up into pieces. I think when Kurzweil is talking about this, really what he means is that the spiritual machines that we're talking about are actually us. We're talking about us merging with our technology, and it's happening already, as I'll explain in a minute. It's not something we should be particularly frightened of, I think. Something we have to figure out how we're going to manage this and how we're going to negotiate our way through it. I don't think Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to come to Earth at this moment and start firing his machine gun. I think really Kurzweil is talking about us and technology blending together to the point perhaps where you can't tell the difference between something that's technological and something that's biological, potentially. And if you want to, it's interesting, I'm sometimes asked in these questions about if you could bring 3 people back from the dead, who would you bring back? And I usually say, I say my grandmother, I say Richard Feynman, and I say Philip K. Dick. Because I think Philip K. Dick, as well as being a kind of cheap pulp science fiction writer, was a great philosopher. And he actually asks 2 questions in his work. That one question that he asks is, what is reality? Like, so what does it mean to be in a world that's real? And the second question, which is relevant tonight, is what does it mean to be human? And the film we talked about before, Blade Runner, comes from this book, obviously, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And really you're saying, well, if we're blending and merging and getting together with our technology, what does it mean? What does that change in terms of us being human? So option number 1 for transcendence is really what I talked about a moment ago through controlling the body. So really here we're relying on our friends in genomics and nanotech to kind of grab hold of the basic mechanisms of the body and make it work a bit better. Like make it tough, make it robust, make it resistant, make it last forever, make it never break down. And again, coming back to science fiction, this is it's actually a collection of short stories by a guy called Cory Doctorow, who's a Canadian science fiction author who lives in London now. And he's written a wonderful short story as a part of this collection called Onzard. And he talks about programmers who managed to discover a way to form an interface between their genomes and a computer. And they're able to turn their basal metabolic rate up. They're able to lose weight at will. They're able to monitor their body for cancer cells and kill them as they go through writing code. They're hacking their own bodies. There's a great scene where one of the programmers explains that he doesn't need to heat his house anymore because he's turned his basal metabolic rate up so much that his body heats the house for him. He eats fuel and it makes the house warm, and he doesn't get fat anymore. And if you want to look at that in terms of where I think we'll be on this paradigm with, say, colorectal cancer surgery in maybe 40 years. Your toilet will probably tell you that there's an abnormal DNA signal when you go to the bathroom. We will somehow get the molecular profile of your tumor. We will do an individual targeted therapy that says your tumor is type this, sensitive to that, and your tumor will then regress and any metastasis will die, and I'll be unemployed, which I think is wonderful. And this is actually a picture from Wired magazine. It's called Artifact. It's a column called, well, it's always on the back page of Wired. It's called Found Artifacts from the Future. And if you look closely, it says Tumor X, 30 milligrams. Take 1 tablet by mouth 3 times daily for treatment of lung cancer. Tumor should disappear by day 20. I mean, imagine getting a diagnosis of lung cancer, same as my grandmother did, and be told, just take this stuff and it'll go away. Because that's what it really means to be in control of the body. To say, well, we've got this down now, and we can switch that gene off and then you're gone. And you go back to living your life the way you want to. The other thing, of course, is longevity. If we can figure out which genes make us age and which genes make us die, then we don't have to do that anymore. We can live as long as we like. There are some issues with that in terms of overpopulation, in terms of, we're already at 7 billion people, and if you keep on reproducing, at some point we're going to have to find somewhere else to live, perhaps, and go off planet. If you're interested in science fiction at all, there's a great British science fiction series called Torchwood. They just had season 4, which is all about Miracle Day. They call it Miracle Day because nobody dies. Everybody stops dying in the world. And what the series explores is, what would it mean if nobody died anymore? and if the population kept rising and rising, and what should we do about that? So that's the potential for getting in charge of the body and stopping disease and stopping aging and stopping dying. Option 2 then is not just accepting the body as it is and making it last longer or making it function better, but actually by going the next step and augmenting the body. And you're already seeing this. You're seeing a bit of a debate arising about whether amputees who are running on legs like this should be allowed in the Olympics, because in some ways they're faster and they're more efficient than people who have actual legs. And of course, someone like this could not walk without an augmentation like that. And it's not just this sort of prosthesis, but any sort of prosthesis, even going back to the kind of much older ones. And if you're looking for this, you've really got to go to video games. This is one that just came out called Deus Ex, another video game I have not finished yet. And Deus Ex is all about augmentations. And as you go through the game, you spend points or whatever to buy the ability to look through walls, or the ability to run faster, or the ability to carry more equipment, or whatever it is. It's all about augmentation. It's all about making the body better. Of course, the most interesting part of all this is not so much, I don't want to carry more stuff in my back. I want a brain that can do a bit more. I maybe want a chip in my brain that's going to accelerate things so I can read things quicker, or I can do multiple things at the same time. Because as I say, I feel a bit like this already. I feel a bit overwhelmed. I feel like there's just too much stuff in my life and I can't cope sometimes. My desk is overflowing. And this is happening already because I have a personal cybernetic assistant in my briefcase called the iPhone, and it's got this thing that just came out a couple of weeks ago called Siri, and I can put it up to my ear and say, Siri, tell me what the weather will be like, and Siri will go to the internet and give me the forecast for Edmonton, or it'll say, phone home right now, or send a text. So it's funny, if we're sitting watching TV in the evenings now, and something happens on the TV, or we want to check some fact, we always have a laptop sitting nearby. We always kind of can go and look it up on the internet. It's not enough to not know things anymore. You're always saying, well, I want to get the information. And I would actually argue these devices are assisting us already and assisting our brains. You don't need to remember stuff when your phone will remember it for you. You don't need to wonder about things when your phone will look stuff up for you. And it can be a bit frustrating when you're trying to teach people because you're wondering what information they have in their heads. And in fact, they're just asking their phone for it. They're saying, well, what does the internet say? It's a bit frustrating. For all that Siri and iPhones are cutting edge, I think probably in a little while we're going to look back on them the way we look back on this guy, with a big, giant cellular telephone. He looks like a kind of refugee from the 1980s because phones aren't like this anymore. And I think we're going to look back at this and say, do you remember the iPhone? Remember how quaint it was that you held something in your hand to get information? Remember you had to type stuff in? Imagine how ridiculously quaint that is now. I suspect the next step after the iPhone is to get some sort of an interface directly with your brain. Like you'll be able to query the internet, you'll be able to organize tasks, you'll be able to see data coming back and forth directly through a brain interface. And if you're looking at authors who are looking at this, there's an Australian guy called Greg Egan who's written quite a lot of speculative science fiction, and the novel that I'm talking about is called Quarantine. And he talks about having a heads-up display which is regulated by a chip in your optic cortex. So when an email comes in, you get a little red light that pops up in the top upper right quadrant of your field of vision, just like this pilot who's got a heads-up display in a fighter jet. And you also have intelligent agents running in the background that can screen messages that are coming in and organize tasks for you, and you can set them to do things while you sleep. So you've got software kind of running in your head in the background. So that's us for augmenting the body. What about option 3, which is backing the body up? And I come back to this image we started off the course with, the cover from Time about, they say that the year that man becomes immortal is going to be 2045. Is it realistic to think that in some way you can back up your consciousness, you can back up what's happening in your brain, which sort of gets you around that problem about the body being fragile? Because if you have a problem with your body, you can just go back to the most recent backup. And it's not terribly science fiction. This is something from the BBC website, which was 6 days ago, 17th of November. And they're talking about scientists at MIT who are replicating brain activity on a microchip. And they're saying, well, we've taken this particular sort of activity on the brain and we can do the same thing on a chip. And that's where we are in 2011. Where could we be in 2045? Is it possible that I could have a disk at home that, just the way it does with my Mac, it backs up my brain? So when I leave in the morning, there's a backup sitting there. It opens up interesting possibilities like, what if that backup gets downloaded into another body? What if, this is my clone? I'm someplace else having a much better time. If you're interested in people who are exploring these ideas, look at the TV series like Doctor Who, where there's a good episode where you've got human colonists who are using clone bodies to do their work for them in dangerous physical environments. And basically, it's an episode about human rights. If you've got somebody who's in a clone body and who has your personality, are they a person or not, and are they entitled to the same rights as the original person? Of course, imagine we go back to the conversation with this grieving relative. Imagine that you say to the wife, "It's terrible. Your husband was killed this morning. LRT, they cut him in half. You squashed him. It was terrible. He's not there." He says, "That's terrible. He's lost everything that happened since breakfast this morning because he only backed up at 9 o'clock. He's lost at least 3 hours experience. He won't remember what the sunrise was like this morning because his new clone body will be ready tomorrow. We'll restore him from backup and we go back to the way we were again." And in fact, nothing is lost. Everything is retained because you've been backed up. And if you want to look at people who are writing about this, here's Cory Doctorow again. This is a book called Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. This is from the prologue, actually. He says, "I lived long enough to see the cure for death, to learn 10 languages, to compose 3 symphonies, to realize my boyhood dream of taking up a residence in Disney World, to see the death of the workplace and the death of work. I never thought I'd see the day when Keep 'Em Moving Down would decide to deadhead until the heat death of the universe." Actually, what happens with the character Dan in that novel is that he does something terrible and he can't live with himself, and he decides to switch himself off until all the energy in the universe is gone. He decides to forego existence, essentially. Option 4 is really to take that backup option another step further and talk about running on another substrate, like taking the processes that are happening in the brain, backing them up somewhere else, and then putting them onto something else. And again, this is an article from the Independent, talking about uploading your brain, about not just backing it up somewhere and restoring it in some way, but actually uploading it and putting it somewhere else, and maybe running it in some different form. And again, authors who have looked at this, like Ian Banks, this is his first novel in a series called the Culture series. There's about 10 of these books now. And Ian Banks talks about a fairly far off period in the future where basically people can be whatever shape and size they want. They can be microscopic, they can be free of gravity, they don't have to worry about radiation or air or food or anything like that. And they can move around the universe at will. And the idea being, well, what would it look like? What would life be like if you were in something that was like that? Or, in fact, what would it be like if you decided you want to get into an artificial body, like a body that's not biological anymore? What would existence be like if we downloaded you into something like this? And again, it comes back to Philip K. Dick. One of the most interesting things about the movie Blade Runner is that Ridley Scott, who directed it, said he's very clear in the plot. There are 5 replicants that are found, and Deckard retires them all. But at the very start, they talk about there being a 6th replicant who's gone missing. And when Ridley Scott did the director's cut of the movie, he said, in the movie, it was very clear to me that Deckard, who's supposed to be the human being who's hunting these replicants down, is the 6th replicant. He's actually as artificial as all the rest of them, and he just thinks he happens to be alive. He happens to be in a body. And I mean, certainly, I think when you watch that movie, Roy Batty is about as human as Deckard, about as human as Harrison Ford is. And I'm not quite sure what it would mean to be a consciousness in a body that's not like this body. Last option then is really to transcend by abandoning the physical entirely, by saying, well, okay, there's something about consciousness that can run in the local space-time continuum. That doesn't have to be in a physical body at all. And this is where it gets a bit weird, where we're really talking about the cosmos and we're talking about the continuum. And Kurzweil talks about it, and he basically says that transcendence will come when we have saturated the local space-time continuum with information. Like we'll have basically used up the local continuum here and have to move to other parts of the cosmos. And there are some writers who are doing this work. There are writers who are looking at this. Greg Bear, who's kind of a notorious for hard SF, he's written a book called Blood Music, where consciousness is absorbed, and people are large numbers of people are absorbed into a kind of a group consciousness and exist somewhere outside the physical environment. It is a bit odd. Greg Egan again has actually looked at this in a thing called a novel called Diaspora, and he's actually got a bunch of characters who start out being human and basically get into the space-time continuum and slip between universes, actually not limited to the physical world at all. So it is a bit odd. It is a bit strange to think about what would consciousness be if it's not located not just in this body but in no body at all. I think this is where writers like Greg Egan are taking us. So really, I want to hear what other people think about these weird ideas. It was why I came here tonight. These are some of the questions that I have, and they're big questions, and we'll never answer them all in one evening. But what would it mean if we decided to move to something other than biology, something that was more reliable, that could, didn't break down, you could upgrade it and had a backup function? And what would it mean if we lost all of these things that we're used to? You think suddenly you're not biological anymore, you don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, no pooping. You don't actually need to work because you don't need money, because you don't need food anymore. You could work if you wanted, you could work on certain things that interested you, but you wouldn't have to. There'd be no poverty, there'd be no war. You wouldn't have to reproduce because you'd live forever. The pressure of time would be gone. If you wanted to spend 100 years looking at a particular thing, you'd be free to do that. Also, because we'd be non-physical beings, there'd be no separation between us, or as much or as little separation as you wanted, and of course no dying. And some of the authors who have looked at this have basically said, well, why couldn't we go to the end of the universe? Why couldn't we exist forever? And maybe this is how we explore the galaxy and explore the universe beyond. It is kind of weird. The other questions that arise are, are you still you if your body changes? Like if my wife switched to a different body, and if she switched bodies tonight and I go home, I would be uncomfortable with that because I'm kind of used to the way that she is. I'm used to her body. I'm also kind of attached to my body. I'm kind of frightened by the idea of leaving it behind somewhere. And what happens if you don't want to transcend? What happens if you actually want to stay in your nice, meaty, comfortable, fleshy, fragile body? This is a book by David Simpson called Posthuman, which is what does it mean for us if we don't like where the singularity takes us, if the singularity changes us so much that we're not the same thing anymore, that we don't recognize ourselves once we've gone through it. This is quite a threatening image, of this silhouette with just the two eyes there. And it brings you to some existential questions, which is, what are we? What are we made of? And what is life for? Is it just for experiencing the physical world? Is it for generating new ideas? Is it like Star Trek to boldly go to other places? These are big questions that we're going to have to struggle with. And we kind of, to a certain degree, we won't know until we've gone down the black hole, because we actually can't really appreciate what is on the other side of the singularity. Because that is, we're talking about this rupture thing, the idea that everything is different after the singularity happens. I'm kind of imagining maybe sometime around 2045, 2044, I'll get an email like this. Thank you for your email. We're pleased to confirm your new substrate is ready. Your appointment for upload is booked. Actually, January the 2nd is a Monday, I checked, in 2045. And you should come 30 minutes before, have something to eat, wear loose-fitting clothes. You'll be uploaded in 15 minutes. Bring a family member because you may be nauseous, and we recommend you should not drive yourself home. Sincerely yours, the Edmonton Upload team. So that's all I've got to say. It's been a great fun, been a great pleasure exploring some of these ideas, and I'm happy to take any questions.